Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Mark, for that kind introduction. I didn't go back and check all my old date books to be sure, but I believe I have attended every one of these Word Alone theological conferences through the years, and I've benefited greatly from all of the presentations I've heard and discussions I've been a part of. After all that, though, I have to say that it feels a bit strange to be standing here on the other side of the microphone. And the burden of responsibility is distinctly heavier. It really is a great honor and a privilege, but also a responsibility to speak here today. So I hope that I can build a bit on Bishop Allison's presentation from last night and help to explain further the theological crisis that has infected not only our ELCA, but most all of Western Christianity. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the well-known German Lutheran pastor and theologian, was executed by the Nazis at the end of World War II. And later it came to light that one of the things Bonhoeffer had done was to join a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. His participation in that plot came as quite a surprise to those who knew him, because Bonhoeffer had been an outspoken pacifist. He admired Mahatma Gandhi and his use of nonviolent means, had even gotten permission to go visit him in India, although Bonhoeffer was never able to go. So the question was, what would drive a pacifist to join an assassination plot? Well, according to his sister-in-law, Emmy Bonhoeffer, he justified it this way. If I see a madman driving a car into a group of innocent bystanders, then I can't, as a Christian, simply wait for the catastrophe and then comfort the wounded and bury the dead. I must try to wrest the steering wheel out of the hands of the driver. Well, that makes sense, I think, even from a pacifist point of view. I mean, killing the one madman, Hitler, would have saved countless other lives. And moreover, like the mad driver of the car, Hitler had instigated the horrible violence of the war, and his death would likely have brought peace, or at least much sooner. In some ways, it's reminiscent of the unwitting prophecy of the high priest Caiaphas in John 11. It is better to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed. But what if the madman in the story was the passenger and not the driver? I mean, what if the driver was entirely safe and sane, and the notion that he was heading for the bystanders was just the passenger's delusion? Can you imagine then the disaster that would ensue as the passenger tried to wrest the wheel from the driver, only to veer into the bystanders or into oncoming traffic? Well, as we consider the theological crisis in Christianity, I think both versions of that illustration help to explain what is happening. If you imagine that the Christian church is the car and God is the driver, at some point, a group of passengers in the Christian car determined that God was no longer driving safely. They became convinced that the way God was driving was threatening harm to all sorts of innocent bystanders. And so they felt conscience bound to try to wrest away the wheel from God. Well, the problem, of course, is that God is right and they were wrong. Those who are trying to wrest away the wheel are under a delusion, and it's their actions that are the dangerous ones. Nevertheless, they've managed to convince a fair number of people, other passengers in the car, that their delusion is actually the truth. And in fact, many of them seem to feel that it's quite heroic, enlightened, faithful, and loving to challenge God for the sake of the bystanders. Now, of course, God and His will are not threatened by this delusion, but the tussle is causing a lot of chaos inside the Christian car. People both in and outside of it are being endangered by its erratic swerving as these deluded folks fight for the wheel. Well, the perplexing question is, where do these theological madmen, so to speak, believe that God went awry? And where should God be driving instead? The more I try to answer that question, the more complicated it seems to get. The theological crisis in Christianity has multiple roots, causes, influences, motivations, and goals. But much of it seems to coalesce around an entirely new way of understanding and proclaiming the Christian faith. The crisis that's caused by this new misguided gospel is what I want to try to talk about with you this morning. So what is the crisis? Well, as most of you know, the life of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America has been marked by a perpetual series of controversies. I mean, it started right out of the chute with the study on ministry and the office of ministry, something the Commission for a Lutheran Church couldn't agree on, and so they said, well, we'll get married first, and then it'll get better. It didn't. In 1993 came the first salvo in the struggles over sexuality. And that first statement that came out just was totally embraced revisionism. Marriage was out, cohabitation was in. Some of you remember the headlines, Lutherans approve masturbation. I mean, it was a disaster. And after an outcry from church members, it just disappeared. It was never voted down, never voted up, just deep sixed. But that process was reborn in 2001. It continues to this day. And indeed, some of us wonder if it will ever end. Shortly after that, the struggle over the ecumenical proposals began. And of course, it was opposition to those proposals that gave birth to the Word Alone Network. I do want to say that, as Bishop Allison's presence here proves, we opposed the agreement with the Episcopalian Church solely on theological grounds, and not, as our critics often charge, due to ignorance of or dislike for Episcopalians. That particular canard needs to be laid to rest for good. Nevertheless, CCM and the other proposals were approved. CCM nearly 10 years ago. It has yet to create the promised land and flowering of mission. Could just be that we were on to something. But the process continues. An agreement with the United Methodist Church is coming to the churchwide assembly next summer, and it's received remarkably little attention. I haven't even seen the text of that agreement. Well, then, most recently, the Renewing Worship Project that resulted in the new hymnal, Evangelical Lutheran Worship, has caused a great deal of dispute and controversy in the church. Well, as we have faced this line of controversies, each one originally seemed to be an isolated issue. I mean, in fact, early on, I think many of us believed that each one was an anomaly. That if we could just defeat this one, then everything would be fine. Again? Those issues motivated a lot of people to get involved and to work for reform, to battle that particular issue and try to correct it. But as the parade of controversies continued, it created a sense of crisis in the ELCA. That something deeper was wrong. Something deeper was going on. People rightly wondered, why do these issues, these troublesome issues, keep arising one after another? And many also became tired of the battle, of fighting one issue after another, and they quit. Some by acquiescing to the ELC agenda, some just by withdrawing from active participation in the denomination, some by leaving and going to other churches. Well, with time,